Hey everyone, welcome to the Sword and Laser. I'm Veronica Belmont.
And I'm Tom Merritt.
Sword and Laser is a book club, but we are so very much more. We bring you author interviews, news from the world of sci-fi and fantasy, and of course amazing discussions from fans just like you. And today we are very excited to have back on the show author Brian McClellan. Brian, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me out.
So today is a big day for you. I mean, we just launched your brand new book, The Autumn Republic, which is the third in the Powder Mage trilogy.
We didn't launch it.
We didn't launch it. I meant
responsibility.
I helped a little bit emotionally, I like to think, supportive. You know, I'm trying to do this thing here, Tom. We're all in this together. But congrats.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. It's the final book in my first trilogy, and I'm kind of blown away that I was actually able to do it.
The Autumn Republic, the last book Brian McClellan will ever write. So go buy it, because you'll never know. Obviously not the last book you'll ever write, but it is a big deal to close off a trilogy like that.
Yeah, it is. My wife and I went out for like a celebratory lunch, and I'm kind of sitting there kind of dazed because it's all finished. You know, 2 years ago I didn't have a single book out, and now I've got a trilogy. It's kind of crazy.
Ah, wow.
Years. That's insane.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even really think of that. Yeah, you're powering through.
They like me to come out with books quick, so I'm doing it.
Now you've indicated that you've got another trilogy in you. Is that right?
Yes, I'm under contract for a second trilogy. It's set in the same universe, all new cast of characters, but about 10 years after the end of Autumn Republic on a different continent. So it'll be standalone but supplemental at the same time.
That's great. So I have to confess that I'm a book behind right now. But is there anything you can tell us about the story, without spoiling it for me specifically, about the latest book?
Oh gosh, it's that's one of those, like, it's hard to say because like a trilogy is, in a lot of ways, it's a single book. Where, you know, the first book is, you know, the opener, the second book is kind of the middle, and the third book is the climax of, you know, of one big story, you know, one big 500,000 word story. So it's kind of difficult to, you know, kind of fill you in. It's not serialized like most urban fantasy is and stuff like that. But basically, the shit has hit the fan, if you'll excuse my French. And everything's just going to hell in a handbasket, and we have to figure out how our heroes are going to get out of it.
And you are going to wrap these storylines up. I'm sure there'll be a few threads here and there, but this is the self-contained trilogy, right?
Yes, it is completely self-contained. There'll be a few little things that I don't wrap up that, you know, that you'll probably see hinted at in the next trilogy or in some of the short fiction I do in between them. But just in a general sense, it's finished.
That is fantastic. That must be, I know you mentioned that it's a huge relief, but was there a lot of extra pressure writing this third book, thinking about the rest of the trilogy and how you were going to kind of bring things to a close?
You know, it's weird because I think that I had a much harder time both writing and with the release of Book 2 than I did with Book 3. Book 2, I struggled with the writing. I had to ditch a whole bunch of it. I kept restarting it, and then when it was coming out, like, I was an absolute nervous wreck that it was going to bomb and everyone was going to hate it. And with this book, you know, I definitely still have the stomach jitters during this launch week, but I think I'm a little more confident about it, and I think I feel better about people hopefully will enjoy it, and it's the last one, so, you know, it's out there, and there's nothing I can do about it, so I don't have another book coming out right after it that nobody else is going to buy because this one was terrible. Not that I think it is. I think that it's the best of the three, but we'll have to see what fans think.
I was really hoping that you didn't correct yourself there, and we could just title this podcast, Brian McClellan Thinks His Third Book is Terrible.
Yes. Let's just take everything out of context.
Well, we've got some great questions from our audience that were posted up at Goodreads. Thanks for posting that on Twitter too. That helped to bring in some good questions, more than we could probably get to today. And I apologize to folks if you don't get your question asked. But to start us off, I want to start with one from Kenny, because for anybody who doesn't know, Powder Mages, which it's the Powder Mage trilogy, are a fairly unique character. And Kenny says, as most authors don't seem to blend technology with magic in classical fantasy, what inspired you to create them? Did it come out of a desire to break with the norm or something else?
I think I had the setting in mind first. I wanted to go with something that was very Napoleonic in feel. And then my next kind of logical conclusion was, okay, so what's different about this era than than a medieval fantasy? And the biggest thing, because you still have that very hint of the old politics of nobility and all that stuff in the time period, even though it's all ending, you still have it. So that wasn't really a big change. The big change seemed to be warfare, and that was the gunpowder. And I thought, okay, well, how would magic change as the technology advances? And then the gunpowder kind of, that made sense. It was, kind of that logical progression.
And speaking of era, actually, Evgeny says the Powder Mage series is much closer to our world in terms of technology than most fantasy books. Do you, Brian, have plans, concrete or not, to take the series into the near future and show off Powder Mages with perhaps machine guns?
To kind of do the Brandon Sanderson thing where I jump ahead a couple hundred years.
Yes, exactly.
It's one of those things that kind of jumps around my head from time to time, but there's no concrete plan that I have that I've fallen in love with enough to actually do it. I've got 3 more books in me, and I already have those planned out, and what era that will be in, which will be pretty much the same. It'll be advanced a little bit, but more like 1830s instead of 1815 kind of thing. But there's not really going to be any difference, and right now I don't think that I'm going to do that. But it's a fun thought concept to just kind of play around with.
Yeah, it's funny. We just will be talking to Peter V. Brett in several weeks at the end of March, and it's all regarding time travel. And his books are taking the opposite, right? It's a society that was formerly technological, and then magic came in and got rid of it. Your books are taking the other aspect, which is magic is actually benefiting from the advent of technology. And that leads me to a question from Sky. He wants to know what the scope of the Powder Mage series or / universe as you currently have it is. And Michael wants to know if you have any plans for after this second Powder Mage trilogy.
In terms of scope, it's a world I kind of has always envisioned it as a world very much like ours in the 1800s, where it's relatively explored, but there are still things that the modern person, the modern man, does not know about and does not, and is trying to explore, and that there are the deep parts of the continents that that they could still find, and there are things out there that people don't know about. It makes it, because that makes it more fun to explore. Today's society, we live in an age of information where everybody knows everything, and if you don't, you can find out within seconds. And that's not how it was, in the 1800s. It was, you could come back from a voyage and tell people that you saw these crazy creatures, and they'd probably believe you because they don't know any better. There's kind of something romantic in a way about that. And in a fantasy world, those crazy creatures you saw are probably real, and that's quite a lot of fun.
I was going to say, even in the 1980s, we didn't as much have that kind of technology, though. I guess we knew a little bit more about the rest of the world than you would in the 1800s.
That's true. That's true. In terms of after Powder Mage, the second series, I don't have anything planned. I'm currently developing with a independent developer a tabletop RPG that will take place right before the first series, on a different continent. So it's gonna be very analogous to the frontier the frontier colonies, former United States before it was the United States.
Gotcha. That sounds
Um,
fun.
so, but with powder mages and privileged and sorcery and all that stuff. So I'm working on that. So working backwards, kind of.
You get to do a bit of a Western take, I would imagine, in that case.
It's gonna come off a little Western.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to do it too strongly because you kind of already had like Red Country from Joe Abercrombie had
Hmm.
that very strong Western vibe, and so I'm not going to do it overtly, but you'll get very much that frontier explorer, lots of endless tracts of land to find and natives and creatures and all sorts of things.
I got it
Uh,
for you. I got the name. Ready? Powder
yes,
Pilgrims.
Powder Pilgrims. Ooh, that's good.
You can use that. I'll give that to you.
Oh, thanks,
I thought
thanks.
you
I
were going to go
appreciate that.
somewhere with powdered wigs somehow.
That could also work if we get into more like revolutionary era.
Yeah.
I could see that happening. Speaking of, I don't have a good segue for this. I'm sorry. Evan wants to know what materials did you find particularly useful when writing the Powder Mage trilogy, like books or documentaries? I was thinking history because I was talking about the Revolutionary War, trying to figure out a segue for that. Didn't work. But yeah, Evan's question is good.
When it comes to research, I'm incredibly lazy, one, which is why I write fantasy and not historical fiction. And so I tend to be kind of a Wikipedia researcher. If I can't find it on Wikipedia, it's not worth looking up. Uh, which is terrible for me to say, but yeah, true. I really like getting inspiration that for kind of an ambiance to the story. Um, I took a lot from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the anime, which I watched right before or around the time I was writing Promise of Blood, and I just absolutely loved that. Um, and turning the Powder Mage series into an anime would be so freaking cool. But the sharp rifles, the both the BBC TV show and the books were just fantastic. And really, I was watching the first Sharp show, the first episode, and that's kind of when it clicked, and I said, "Holy crap! This is the era that I want to do my next book in." So that kind of started it all. So there are lots of little things have lent bits and pieces to my series, and I just kind of like to pull things that I like and twist them to my own needs.
That's an interesting question because there's obviously freedom that you have in creating your own world. You're not setting this in an actual historical era, so you can change things. But how do you walk the line of plausibility and know like, well, I have to research that, I have to get that part right, or else it just I can't magic everything away. Like how do you decide how much of that research you feel like you need to get?
It's because it's second world. You can get away with things like I don't need to get like clothing styles accurate to within the month or anything like that.
Sure.
Um, but there's stuff like I want to know what the muzzle velocity of the average musket or rifle was. Stuff like that are things that I want to look up. And it's you kind of have to go with a gut feeling on it. Does this sound plausible in my world? And then I look at a difference. There's kind of the scale of cool versus plausible, and you have to kind of run right in the middle. And sometimes you risk plausible for cool, because you're writing something to entertain people. And I actually was called out by Brandon Sanderson on that a couple times, and very very lovingly he thought it was kind of funny, but it's true, and I kind of like erring on the side of this sounds really awesome. I think I'll do this, even though it doesn't quite fit. As I kind of mature as a writer, I'm trying to do better about making it fit and be cool. But it's something that you have to always think about.
Well, yeah, even Andy Weir, when he was writing The Martian, which he avowedly was trying to get everything exactly right, he'll say, like, oh, I definitely fudged this and this because it wouldn't have been a very good story otherwise.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to take those licenses. I'm curious what Brandon Sanderson called you out on.
Oh no, he it wasn't anything specific. We were at a panel together on Salt Lake Comic Con, and he just was poking fun at the fact that because he's very strict about his rules of magic, and I am less so. And he pointed that out in front of a few hundred people.
You have a more comfortable and relaxed form of magic than Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not so form fitting. It's
No, but it was as long as it's fun, that's what matters to me.
All right. Robert wants to know. Well, actually, Robert says, "I know you're a fan of Star Wars, and you've written how The Empire Strikes Back helped you finish the Crimson Campaign and the Autumn Republic." He wants to know, in what other ways has your love of Star Wars impacted your writing?
Oh gosh, probably a ton. In a lot of subconscious ways. Up until I was about 18, which would have been 11 years ago, I read every single thing that came out in the Star Wars universe. I read the Star Wars Encyclopedia. I read all of the young adult stuff. I devoured that. And then they, started killing some of the characters I loved, and I had an emotional reaction to that, and I stopped reading them. So I don't know. It probably has influenced a ton of ways that I think and kind of approach writing, but nothing I can think of off the top of my head.
Gotcha. Yeah, Star Wars. I mean, it's kind of formative for a lot of us in many ways. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly how that may be, but it's like any classic sci-fi or classic fantasy. We all kind of absorb it, and you may not realize how it comes out later.
Yeah, yeah. It was funny because I was oh crap, I can't remember which it is. I think it was at Gen Con last year that I was sitting around with a bunch of author friends, and we're all chatting with this one guy, and nobody had introduced me to him, but we're all chatting and everything, and one of my friends leans over to me and says, "Hey, do you know who that is?" And I was like, "No," and he goes, "Oh, that's Michael Stackpole."
Oh,
And I freaked out on the inside. Like I have a pretty good poker face with that sort of thing. I don't really fanboy very often, but I was just squeeing like crazy.
Yeah, he's a regular at Dragon Con, and he's always around the podcasting room because he's in panels that are in nearby rooms, it seems like, and it's crazy that there's Mike, he's just hanging out.
Yeah,
it's one of the
he's
wonders of
fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of cons.
No, but I kind of did that little fan thing where I was like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't want to be weird, but I absolutely loved your Star Wars books growing up and everything." And he was super nice, and he chatted with me for like 2 hours, and just the nicest guy.
I have to recommend a book my friend Brian Brushwood talked me into reading, which was great, called the How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, which just kind of is a great overview of all the known bits about how the movies got made and how they came about. It's really good.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I would actually check that out myself. And I'm more of a Trekker than a Star Wars person myself, but I can swing both ways.
You do have a picture of Jean-Luc Picard behind you right now.
Two pictures.
That's
They're
true.
both
Gosh,
Jean-Luc
dude, that's
Picard.
awesome.
One he's fighting, the other he's fighting he who shall not be named. All right. Our next question comes from Rob Secundus, who wants to know any recent nonfiction or historical reads that you really loved or would like to recommend. So continuing on that recommendation track.
Ooh, I actually am terrible with titles, and especially when it comes to nonfiction. I went about a month and a half ago. I went to Half Price Books and picked up just a giant stack of history books concerning the early 1800s Americas, because for kind of research inspiration purposes for the next series. And I've read through like little bits and pieces. I like skimming and looking at cool chapters and stuff. And I've read through a bunch of them, and I don't remember any of the titles. But I'm a fan, especially when it comes to writing, and you want to get a feel for the era. I'm a huge fan of finding just random history books and just kind of leafing through them and reading chapters about something in particular that you're looking to get across to your readers.
Well, Tom used to work at Half Price Books, so
I was
he'll
about
probably
to
be able
say-
to find those
I was
titles
gonna
for
say,
you.
just describe the color. I used to work in
Oh.
the history section at Half Price Books in Austin. I could probably recognize.
Tom, did you know that I was going to say that? Did you know that was
No,
coming?
I didn't. I was about to say the same thing. That's hilarious.
Oh, that's great. Half Price Books is one of the best places ever. When I was at school in Utah, I was so sad that we didn't have one. I actually wrote a letter to like the CEO or whatever. And
Ken Jemry or
yeah,
yeah.
they had like a contact information for on the website. This is forever ago, and I'm sure it was read by a secretary or whatever. But I just sent an email saying, hey, are you guys considering opening a Half Price Books in Utah? I think it would be great here. And yeah, they weren't interested.
Oh, well, Tom
Too
could have
bad.
opened the satellite office out there or something. Who knows? It could have been a very different world.
That's right.
I guess we'll never know.
Everything. All right. Our next question comes from from Andy. He says, "Eventually, spring will be here. What will you be planting in the garden?"
Oh gosh, my usual is always basil, tomatoes, peppers, of a couple of different varieties of peppers, and then just tending to my rhubarb and raspberries.
Oh, raspberries. That sounds amazing.
I want to eat all of those things.
Yeah, can we just make a
good
salad
choices.
out of it?
I do my own spaghetti sauce. So I grow all of the vegetables in it, and then I go to Costco and get giant things of spices, and then make 6 or 7 gallons worth of spaghetti sauce.
And then you freeze it and keep it for the whole year?
Can it? But yeah,
Yeah.
we keep it for the whole year and have spaghetti once a week, and it's
Nice.
amazing.
You grow garlic? Did you say?
I don't grow garlic.
Okay.
Garlic is one of those ones you have to like plant it in the fall, and I always forget.
It's
So I
tricky.
wind up, and you can get a giant bag of garlic for like $4. So
Yeah.
it's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, now that I'm hungry, Steve has a question. He says, you have one of the strongest fan bases I've seen for a relatively new author. What are some of the things you learned along the way that you could recommend to other new authors, resources, approach? What might be a waste of time versus something well worth doing?
I mean, all those, that's kind of like, really depends on situational kind of stuff. I mean, it depends on whether you're talking about in the writing or interacting with fan base or interacting with your editor, things like that. But generally, it's good to keep a sense of humor. It's good to sometimes set boundaries with fans. There's lots of little tiny things that you kind of just learn along the way through experience. You kind of learn to develop all the various relationships and kind of figure out whether they are professional or personal or somewhere in between. Because you kind of have to, it's like any other business. It's a creative endeavor, but it is a business. So you have to kind of figure out all that stuff as you go.
You're using Patreon, and you're a published author with a contract, as you mentioned, but you're also using Patreon to crowdfund some of your work. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
So I love the concept of Patreon, and originally I kind of wanted to do a Patreon for my short fiction, but I because I'm very sporadic with it, I kind of write a new short story or novella when I want to. And when the idea comes to me, rather than on a regular basis. I didn't really want to use that. And then I realized that I had been kind of doing these essays over the last 2 years. Once in a while I would do an industry essay where I would talk about, like one of them was an author's perspective on book fairs. And I just talked very candidly about the experience of an author at a book fair. And people seem to really like those. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I go do a Patreon where the goal of the Patreon is to fund me doing these essays once a month, and putting out an essay on what it is like to be an author and kind of some of the more nitty-gritty of how that works.
That's
Very
great.
cool.
And yeah, that's I love perspective like that. So I think that's always a really fun thing for authors to do because also, authors are writers and it's fun to get other kinds of writing out of authors every so often, a more personal perspective, a more, things that we can are more relatable to our day to day rather than something in the fantastical. So I think that's and also it's
Hmm.
just, it keeps your brain flexible, I think, to write something outside of what you're used to writing all the time.
No, it's definitely fun. I mean, actually, that touches on a really good point. And it's one of the reasons I do my short fiction is it's a good mental exercise to work on something other than slogging through a novel. To just try to do something that's a little more, I don't know, analytical. Because you're kind of with these essays I'm trying to do, very very analytical, kind of by the numbers sort of thing, but also give a very personal and private kind of introspective of it. Like the first essay I did, which was last month, was the psychology of being a full-time author. And I had a bunch of my author friends say that that was spot on and that they had very similar experiences, and people seemed to really like the essay. So I seemed to work so far. So hopefully I can keep doing these and be able to come up with new and interesting things to talk about every month.
All right, our penultimate question. We've been saving this for the end. It's the hardest hitting question we have from Michael. When will you conquer the world with your bee army?
I'll need a few more bees, actually. I would actually love someday to own like a full apiary, and kind of more on. I don't actually want to do it myself because I'd love to keep the me doing beekeeping personally as a hobby, but I would love to own a business, like actually own a few hundred hives and produce local honey and sell it at local fairs and stuff like that. I think that would be really cool.
So you are a beekeeper, right, at
I
home.
am a beekeeper. Yes, I have one hive sitting in the very back of my backyard that last year I got 30 pounds of honey out of.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing. Yeah, a friend of mine keeps bees. It's very popular in San Francisco.
Hmm.
And we got a jar of her most recent output, and it was delicious. So
Uh,
it's
homegrown
awesome.
honey, it's so much better than store bought. Oh, it's so good.
Now I'm super hungry. Our final question is from Jiri, who says, or Yuri, is it just me, or does the guy from the Promise of Blood book trailer look like Jeremy Irons? Could you elaborate? And also, I feel like maybe we've talked about this before.
I'm pretty sure we talked about this before, but if anybody else is curious, so the guy on the front of the in the book trailer is actually it's the same guy from the covers, and he was Pierce Brosnan's stunt double for the James Bond movies. Um, and one of the reasons they got him was because they asked me about character inspiration and stuff, and Field Marshal Tomas, in my head, was always Jeremy Irons. And so, they kind of went
So
with
dead
something very
on.
close to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yep, that's very close, and that's why.
Do you get a lot of input into the book covers?
Um, you know what? My input to from what I understand, I get more than a lot of authors. I kind of I have a good dialogue with my editor where my publisher asks me a ton of questions and really wants my opinions and thoughts, and then goes and does whatever they want. Uh, but so far, whatever they want has been both amazing and not that far off from my own in my head kind of stuff. So I've loved it. I've had no complaints whatsoever.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Of course, as we mentioned, his latest, The Autumn Republic, is out now in stores, and we want to get people to buy it so we can shoot up those Amazon charts, those Kindle charts, and whatnot. We're very excited for you. Congrats on wrapping up the trilogy.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
And of course, if you love Brian's work, you can help support him and his essays over at patreon.com/Brian McClellan. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. And, I've got a little extra pocket change hanging out in your back pocket. You can also support us at patreon.com/Sword and Laser, or just get in touch with us at feedback@swordandlaser.com. The website is swordandlaser.com, and all of our discussions happen over on goodreads.com/Sword and Laser. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everybody.